So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there.
So Eimear, a couple of weeks ago, we had sat down on a Friday afternoon to record a podcast about the Lisa Thompson trial, only to find out that the case had been, basically the trial had been stopped. The jury had been discharged and they were to re-begin the trial again on the following Monday, and it was completely scrapped. But now the case has come to a conclusion. Brian McHugh has been found guilty of murdering Miss Thompson at her home in Ballymun on May 9th, 2022. Can you tell us a little bit about that case?
Yeah, so Lisa Thompson was found in her home, in the rear of her home, with she had 11 stab wounds and she had a blind cord wrapped around her neck. I think 6 of the stab wounds had actually penetrated her heart, and like some had gone through and through. And you know, there was actually, it was heard in court that there was an element of overkill to it. So she suffered horrendous injuries. So Brian McHugh has been on trial for the last couple of weeks, and we've heard it's very like it's been kind of complex. There's been you know, circumstantial evidence given, but ultimately like the prosecution were able to wrap all of these things together and bring quite a compelling case to the jury, because they took just over 3 hours to find him guilty. You know, there was CCTV of him near her home on the night she died. There was his DNA found on the blind cord that was wrapped around her neck. There was evidence given that they'd had like an on-off kind of, I think it was described in court as a bit of a fling the previous year, and he'd come back into her life in a month or two previous to her killing. You know, and then there was evidence that he was found in possession of some of the jewellery from her home. So there was lots of different things that kind of brought it all together and resulted in the jury finding him guilty of murder.
And there was evidence heard as part of the trial that Miss Thompson was dealing prescription tablets from her home, and that she had maybe 5 or 6 different customers. Was that part of the evidence against Brian McHugh?
Well, it was brought in as the general sort of, I suppose, a neighbour who knew Lisa quite well. She gave that evidence saying that she was dealing prescription tablets from her home, and that the Gardaí that was also part of the evidence that Gardaí found €50,000 worth of prescription tablets in her bedroom. And she had said, as you said, that she had 5 or 6 customers that they would come in around the back. And that like Lisa, as a result of this, Lisa was quite security conscious. So there wasn't anything said, you know, that she was dealing to Brian McHugh or that he was involved in this. But I guess, you know, that was part of evidence to show that, you know, she had been doing this, and that, you know, she would have obviously had money in her home, and, you know, that maybe she got involved with, not that she got involved, but that there were obviously people coming to her home to buy these prescription drugs of her. So it was kind of as the general picture that was painted, you know, and it was, you know, heard at one point that she had given someone else €20,000 because she was worried about it being stored in her house. So this was all presented, you know, and the defence actually tried to sort of cast aspersions on this part of her life, because they said that, you know, she was a complex character, and that, you know, she basically led a secretive life, and that there was more than met the eye there. But obviously this was dismissed, and the jury did find Brian McHugh guilty.
And there was money. That money was found in her home. Was there anything else that was found in the house? I mean, obviously, you know, you would maybe conclude that if there was no money taken, that maybe robbery wasn't the motive for her killing. Was there any reason given for why, you know, a motive? I know that the prosecution don't necessarily have to prove a motive or even present a motive for a killing. Yeah. But was there sort of anything like that brought up in the case?
Yeah, so there was, like, I suppose in the closing speech, this was why it was deemed a complex case. And, you know, like, you know, they had basically the prosecution described how, they brought together a tapestry of evidence to show, and some of it was circumstantial, but to show that, this all fitted together to make it, not really credible that anyone other than Brian McHugh could have done this. And I suppose there was evidence given about how prescription tablets were found in 2 sports bags. It was hidden in a water tank in her attic. That there was jewellery missing from her home. There was actually a certificate. So a former fiance, they were together a long time ago, gave evidence about how he'd bought her an engagement ring in 2006, and a certificate of to prove the value of the ring was found in a car belonging to a woman who was with Brian McHugh on the night that Lisa Thompson died. So this was obviously proving that this certificate had the certificate had Brian McHugh's DNA on it. So things like this were brought to show that there was jewellery taken from her home. He later tried to sell this jewellery. There was other possessions. I think Lisa Thompson's keys were found discarded in wasteland beside a petrol station. Brian McHugh had been seen at that petrol station on the night that Lisa Thompson died. So, all of these elements kind of brought together a general case to show that we don't know what his direct motive was, but we know that he had some kind of relationship with her. He'd been to her home many times. He obviously knew about this business, and he had taken things from her home as well.
Yeah, and the DNA, his DNA was also found on the blind cord that was used in her murder?
Yes, yeah, it was, yeah. So he was put at the scene, and then there was CCTV footage seen, I think between the hours of around 1 to 3 a.m. on the night that she died, and there was a light shown coming on. So obviously she was there at that point and alive at that point. And then he was seen leaving the scene in a car. And there was also, he was seen, he obviously did take things from her house because he was seen going through a red wallet that was alleged in court to have belonged to Lisa Thompson. This was in the car that was shown on CCTV. He was seen rummaging through a red pillowcase, which obviously the prosecution said came from Lisa Thompson's bedroom. So, he did take these things from her house. And they managed to put that together that it was all on the night that Lisa Thompson died. And as I said, there was items found discarded that was linked to Lisa Thompson belonging to her. So, all of this did, I suppose, provide a compelling case. And I guess the defence, it was a complex one in that the defence tried to, put confusion there, because there wasn't I suppose a smoking gun. There was obviously DNA found in the blind cord, but he had said in his defence that he was going a lot from Lisa Thompson's house. So he was trying to, I suppose, offer other reasons why he may have been there. Defence also brought up how there was 2 Gardaí who identified Brian McHugh from that CCTV footage, and last year it was ruled that his trial couldn't go ahead because the 2 Gardaí were later involved in procuring witnesses. So they were kind of readying witnesses for the case, and then they later gave verification of Brian McHugh, and it was said that this was a conflict of interest.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I was actually just about to ask you about that pre-trial ruling. So can you explain a little bit about what you mean when you say the Gardaí were they were procuring witnesses? So they were basically had seen the CCTV footage, and it was I assume suggested that they may have kind of been leading the witnesses, quote unquote, as in telling them who was seen in the CCTV footage. Is that right? Yeah,
basically, because obviously when guards are given, we've seen this in other cases where they may know people from, they might have a criminal history, or they might know them from the area, from policing in the area, and they're able to identify them from CCTV as part of the case. But they have to be shown, there's certain procedure that has to be followed by the guards, and their a lead detective has to I think they're brought in separately, and there's made sure that there's no pre-discussion or any of that kind of thing. So in this case, there was a guard called Connolly, and basically he had said he engaged with Brian McHugh during his police work, and he identified him on CCTV, and he basically spoke about his distinctive appearance. He said he had a big physical stature. He said he had protruding ears and a very distinctive gait when he was walking. But then he was cross-examined by the defence, and basically he agreed that 2 days before he viewed this CCTV footage to say, yeah, that's Brian McHugh, that he had taken statements from witnesses in the case. So, this was kind of used about and the detective inspector who would have like authorised him viewing like the CCTV to identify Brian McHugh, that he wasn't aware of this. And then there was another guard who basically said that he'd prepared an interview plan for suspects. So, you know, this is how we're going to approach interviewing people who were suspected in this case. So then he'd also viewed the CCTV footage, and he said he recognised them, that he had, from his side profile, again, he mentioned this distinctive walking gait. And they would have obviously been interviewed separately about this, but I suppose it was put to them then, you know, is there not kind of, is this independent and is this impartial as it should be? And, you know, the detective inspector who oversaw this process where the guards identified Brian McHugh had said that, you know, that this hadn't happened in the case. Like nothing had been compromised in the case, and it was allowed then in the end.
Yeah. And this can be sometimes very interesting in those kind of pre-trial hearings where you're kind of, I suppose, as us kind of crime nerds or whatever you might call us, get to kind of get an insight into what the processes are, what you know, the Gardaí's procedures and how they actually operate. Because you know, you never really get to hear that other than when it's in court or whatever like that.
Exactly.
Because obviously, you know, you hear a lot about the way they might proceed. Police might proceed with cases in the US and whatnot, and I'm sure it's not too different, but it's rare that you actually get an insight as a, I suppose, a lay person into actually how the Gardaí work. But there was also some text messages in this case that were exchanged that were quite interesting, and the senior investigating officer gave some testimony about this during the trial.
Yeah, so basically there was a woman. Now she's described as a name woman, but we haven't identified her. So she had picked up Brian McHugh and she was with him on the night that Lisa Thompson died. And basically she had sent him texts in the month after Lisa Thompson died, and basically had said, you know, she had described things about how, you know, you stabbed Lisa, you strangled and stabbed Lisa. And this was obviously, as I said, weeks later. And basically the guards used this as evidence to say at that point in time, it hadn't got into the public domain, and they'd actually made an effort for that not to be out in the media about how Lisa died. So how else could she have known this? And then there was other messages sent from the woman saying, murdered Lisa and all. Moved the knife, did you? And then she had sent another text saying, goodbye, I'm going into Ballymun station, I'm telling. And then she referenced runners and the knife, and obviously they were used as part of the case. You know, they were missing, the knife was missing in the case, and then there was also a pair of runners seized that had no blood on them, and I think they were trying to infer that the blood had been removed from the runners.
So, you know, sort of a clean-up operation. But that sort of thing there, you're saying, you know, that kind of, I suppose, called guilt knowledge, that when Gardaí, you know, if there's a murder or there's a killing and it's suspected to be you know, a fatal attack and somebody else is involved and an investigation is launched, we'll often see at the end of a press release, you know, the result, you know, a post-mortem has been carried out, the results of which are not being released for operational reasons. And this is those reasons, because if somebody comes forward and gives a statement to Gardaí, they're able to determine, well, we know this is genuine, that they have genuine knowledge of what happened in a murder because we didn't release that information. That information has been in the media, and that's how they can do that. Yeah,
and like this would be an example of circumstantial evidence, and like often defence try to sort of undermine circumstantial evidence, and in this case the defence in its closing argument said, you know, the prosecution wants to wrap this up in a neat little bow, but it's more complex. Lisa lived a very secretive life. But I think when you have these text messages which do show intimate knowledge of something that we know happened, and then you have all the other elements, you have the CCTV footage, you have evidence of their on and off relationship, you have his DNA on a blind cord. You know, obviously DNA is hard and fast evidence, but that's not circumstantial. But if you just had that on its own and this person was known to be in the home, you know, that could be attempted to explain why he was there. But all of these different elements are brought together to actually send a really strong case. And obviously the jury felt that because they came back quite quickly in the end.
Yeah, they did. That was a very, you know, short amount of time. And like we had said before, this trial had begun. It was, I think, 2 or 3 days in, and unfortunately they did have to stop. And we found out later that is because apparently somebody who was there reporting on the trial and was in the courtroom said to me that what happened was somebody, they believe from the jury, had gotten sick.
Okay.
So they didn't want to continue just as an 11 that early on. And I think as well at the time we we weren't too sure whether something had been said, because oftentimes, you know, the wrong thing can be said in court and the defence or the prosecution might, you know, have a motion to dismiss the trial because the jury shouldn't have heard X, Y and Z.
Yeah.
And those kind of things do happen. But it just seemed that just kind of was the case. It was something, you know, just procedural rather than some sort of error being made. But that case, so now he will be given the mandatory life sentence. When is he going to be sentenced by the judge?
March 10th. So just over a week he'll be sentenced. But I suppose Lisa Thompson's family will be given a chance then to give their victim impact statements. It's just a formality, as in, as you said, like he has to give him life because it's a murder conviction, but they will be able to hear what impact it had on her family. And obviously he gave his condolences to her family, and you know that we always have to remember that, you know, like that there was a lot of personal information about Lisa given into the public domain, and like obviously the defence tried to sort of use the complexities of her life and whatever activity she might have been undertaking to, like, you know, try and explain certain things, why Brian McHugh was in her life and why X, Y and Z may have happened. So at the end of the day, like, we had to remember that this is a woman, she was a mother, and you know she had a family, and you know I can't imagine what they have been going through, but like, you know, it's never like, I hope that they get to have their say, because like the things, people hear these things in a nutshell, and you just hope that they don't judge someone off it, because we have no idea what was going on in that woman's life, you know, and why people do things that they do. But like, you know, she was put through an awful, like, horrendous ordeal. So that's kind of the crux of the case, despite anything else that may have been said. So, you know, the family will be given an opportunity to maybe talk about her. And
because obviously throughout the trial, I feel like the criminal justice system can be very kind of black and white, cut and dry. There's no real human emotion to it at all. I mean, it's very to the letter of the law, quite literally. And it's only when, you know, the dust kind of settles and the family come in and they're able to give their impact statements, like you said, talk about who Lisa was and talk about how that crime has affected their lives. And, you know, they'll all, you know, whoever from the family wants to give a victim impact statement, which again, like I said, is procedure, will have the time to do so. And even though, of course, it is a mandatory life sentence that is handed down for murder, I suppose, you know yourself, it is always kind of that extra time is given so the families do have an opportunity to gather their thoughts in the aftermath and then present their own version of events or their own words to the judge and to the jury, and to the judge and to the public. Because it's at that point then, obviously, as a new news agencies or news reporters can obviously report then on what's been said about Lisa and her family's words, and that's their way of, I suppose, putting out their story and you know, remembering her. But that's not the only trial, I suppose, that came to a close at the Central Criminal Court this week. There was a second trial which has come to its end, and Mr. Justice Paul McDermott is in the middle at the moment of delivering his charge to the jury. So before we I suppose go into that case, what does it mean when the judge is delivering a charge to the jury?
So basically, like, before the jury will go out to deliberate on their verdict, so obviously the evidence is heard. There's prosecution evidence, and there's a defence evidence, and then both sides close. So they give, you know, a synopsis of the case and why they think that the person should be found guilty or not guilty, and then it's up to the judge to basically talk them through the you know, any kind of procedural issues, or basically to describe what certain things mean, and, you know, like, to basically ensure that they're being impartial and that, you know, pointing out anything that they should be aware of. So to make sure that he has basically crossed every check line and made sure that, you know, they're relying solely on evidence in front of them, and that, you know, anything else that may have been said that shouldn't be relied on to bring a verdict or anything like that. It's you know, it's basically up to him to summarize the case, and he's the legal expert. He's basically the you know, the mediator in terms of he's listening, but he's also facilitating the jury to come to their verdict. So it's just to make sure that they know you know, what they should be taking into account, what they shouldn't be taking into account, and what it means as well, I suppose.
And that can take a little bit of time. So the case we're talking about is the murder of Robin Wilkin in Donegal in June June 2023. And Alan Vial, 39, and Nikita Burns, 23, have been accused. They've stood trial and both deny the murder. So can you tell us a little bit about that case and how that's been?
Yeah, so basically his body was found, he was missing, and then his body was found in the waters near Slieve League. It's obviously a very well-known mountainous range in Donegal. It's one of the highest sea cliffs in Ireland. And he had been socialising with Alan Vial and Nikita Burns. And when he was found, some of his injuries showed that he'd been beaten with a rock. So basically the woman and man were a former couple, and they've both been accused of his murder. And obviously the trial has been heard for the last few weeks, but essentially the prosecution are trying to say that basically Nikita Burns and Alan Vial had a joint enterprise, which means that both parties had entered into this incident with knowledge that this would result in someone's serious injury or death, so that they're both guilty for that reason. And that was part of the judge's charge, to basically explain that, if you find them guilty by this, you have to be sure that they both knew what they were doing and that this could possibly result in someone's murder. But then he also said, if you find that you can convict them individually, so you can find that one person was, had the intention of murder here and that maybe the other person didn't. So then you can enter out of the, the joint enterprise, but, find that they were individually liable. So that's kind of an example of what a judge would be sort of trying to explain to a jury in layman terms. But essentially the case centres around how these three people were drinking, and they were driving home then or driving to a location, and essentially Alan Vial and Miss Burns have given conflicting events of theories of what happened. And basically one had said that Miss Burns was in the front passenger seat next to Robert Wilkin, and that they got into an argument, and Miss Burns has claimed that Alan Vial basically started punching Robert Wilkins from behind, that they stopped the car, and that he basically attacked Robert Wilkins with a rock. And then he has a counter argument. He was saying that they got into an argument, and then there was some kind of altercation and the car was stopped, and then that Miss Burns attacked Robert Wilkin with a rock. And then he is saying that they both took his body and moved it over the cliff and pushed it into the sea. Now he has admitted that he was involved in facilitating the aftermath, so that he basically helped move his body into the sea. But Miss Burns has denied this, and then she's also, but she has admitted that she helped clean up the car afterwards. So essentially, they're admitting that they were involved in the aftermath, but they both deny murder. And then he's basically tried to blame his ex-lover on it, and he was given evidence. He gave evidence in court. And basically the judge kind of in his charge to the jury had said that, you obviously have to take into account, if he is giving this evidence, is it to try and implicate a co-accused? You have to be happy that, this evidence, you can use the evidence, but you have to be very happy that it's based on logical reasons, and it's not just to try and bring somebody else into it. Because obviously he's not he's an involved witness in the case, basically.
So this one then, the jury didn't sit on Friday and they're not due to sit on Monday. So they return next Tuesday when Justice Paul McDermott will continue giving his charge to the jury. But we're going to quickly, something else that came up in court this week. We spoke about this before, and that is Fat Freddie Thompson. He had asked for his court case, his trial for threatening to kill a prison officer, to be moved to Tullamore. He said that he had security concerns about the trial being held in Portlaoise, because it was his belief that he would be shot or killed by somebody from the Hutch Organised Crime Group. So that's now come to fruition, and it seems like his trial is going to be moved.
Yeah, so basically we've talked about this a few times on the podcast, and he has said that, obviously Fat Freddie Thompson is in Portlaoise prison, or was in Portlaoise prison at the time, serving a life sentence for the murder of Daithí Douglas. He died as part of a feud back in 2016, and he had tried to originally get his trial moved to Dublin. He had given evidence that, it's safer in the Central Criminal Court of Justice because you can be brought straight into an underground car park. There's more security going through the courts there. And the Portlaoise was very open. He, as we said before, he used the example of how he was approached by photographers, including a Sunday World photographer who we got a picture of him with his Supermax, and that, that could have been, he didn't know who those people were. But then there was counter evidence from Gardaí basically saying that there's always a security plan in place when it comes to Freddie Thompson. He's a high risk prisoner, and that they didn't have any concerns. So the last we had heard, the judge had basically said that he did think that there needed to be a rethink around Portlaoise Court, and that he did cite how there was plans to build a new courthouse, and that he thought that would help make things a bit more secure. And he did talk about how it was maybe not the best idea for prisoners to be brought out of a prison van into a court on a public street, but at the same time he didn't think that Fat Freddy needed to be brought to Dublin. He cited various other things in court, and ultimately he said you can go to Tullamore because I think there's a more secure car park in Tullamore. And it was put back to this week for Fat Freddy to basically give his okay on this. And Fat Freddy obviously was giving video evidence, and he essentially said, okay, yeah. So basically he is going to be now tried for assault causing harm of a prison officer in Tullamore Court, and it's been put back to later this year
back to July by the look of things.
Yeah, so basically it will be back up. I don't know if the trial will go ahead then. There'll probably be, more procedural matters heard then. And essentially he has agreed to the move of venue.
And of course, the other major thing that happened in court this week, Nathan MacDonald handed down a 12-year sentence. But Nicola and Niall have done really in-depth podcast episode about that, talking about what he was like in court today. Of course, he's had surgery on a broken jaw, and he's now set to spend 12 years behind bars. But that is that for this week. Eimear, thank you very much.
Thanks, Clodagh.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.